writing them an email, say, or maybe on the phone, expressing gratitude to someone like a former teacher, or, my partner or someone, close to me. In terms of kindness, again, that's something that can sometimes backfire, because if we're too kind to others, we all know people who are sort of too giving and they kind of neglect themselves somewhat. Or sometimes we do acts of kindness and they kind of, they're not effective. Maybe we might actually end up making the person that we're trying to help feel even worse, right? Because we might come off as being sort of patronizing, or we might feel exploited or taken advantage of. So we have to be careful with that too. I'm always sort of conscious of kind of like how to balance some of sort of the costs and benefits. So I like to do more like random acts of kindness, where I might give a compliment to sort of a cashier at a grocery store, and they're like shocked to hear that, because they, maybe they're in a bad mood or just doing some really rote work. But my favorite strategy, my favorite sort of approach to happiness has to do with connection, because I really think the connecting to others is what makes life worth living. And when you think about why are gratitude and kindness so effective at improving happiness, and that is because both of those activities make us feel more connected. When we express gratitude, we feel more connected to the people we express gratitude to. When we help others, we feel more connected to those people and to sort of humanity as a whole. And I'm an extrovert, but you don't have to be an extrovert to sort of find connection as impactful, because it could be one person in your life that you really want to connect on a deeper level with. And so we've done some studies. One of my favorite studies in my lab, we asked people to simply act more extroverted than you normally do. So for 1 week, do whatever it is that you want to do, just to act a little bit more extroverted. Maybe speak up more when you're at lunch with friends, or approach someone, say hello, or have a longer conversation. And then another week, people were asked to act more introverted. So to be kind of a little bit more thoughtful and deliberate in sort of what they're doing. Don't sort of speak too soon. We found huge effects in terms of positive mood, flow, sense of connection, sense of well-being during that week that people acted more extroverted. So when we engage in more social interactions, we feel more connected, we're in a more positive mood. It just has all kinds of effects, all kinds of ripple effects.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I think I recognize that in myself, that sometimes I'm not looking forward to a social interaction, whether it's a team gathering or a social event or a family thing. I'm feeling a bit low energy, and then I go anyway, and I find that it has a huge impact on my mood. And I sort of remind myself that being willing to engage socially is almost always beneficial. Though we have to, I think, recognize that extroverts and introverts might respond differently to social connection and have different motivations.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say exactly. So different people with different personalities are going to respond differently. Not everyone's going to want to go to big parties, and some people might just want to have a lunch with a friend. But we all benefit from social interactions, which is something that has been, I think we all know, has been really difficult in this last few months, when, some studies show that we're now reducing our social interactions by 95% in person. And in-person social interactions are really important for us human beings who've been basically hardwired to interact in person, to kind of read those cues, to experience, to breathe the same air, to touch, to smell, to sort of read all those gestures and very subtle nonverbal cues that are much harder to read on a video call like this one.
Yeah.
And so we're all kind of suffering a little bit by not having as much social interaction as we'd like. And so obviously people are trying to make up for that in different ways, but that is something I've been thinking a lot about.
Yeah, I have as well, and I sort of like to dive a bit deeper on that, because obviously this COVID situation has been difficult in many ways. It's also, I think, given many people a chance to wake up to what really matters, and people have spent more time with loved ones and more time reconnecting with nature and getting away from, hobbies or shopping or work that they don't enjoy. So there are some benefits, although there are obviously big downsides. But this connection thing seems really, really important to me. And I was struck today when I walked my son to school, the first time we've been back to the school gate since certainly before the summer break, and just seeing all these people and making face-to-face connection with some people I'd seen online, but it really isn't the same, actually. It was actually slightly overwhelming to be back in that world again.
Yeah, isn't that just amazing? Just making eye contact with someone. We just have so little of that now, kind of those spontaneous interactions with both acquaintances, maybe a fellow parent at the school, but also strangers too. I mean, I like to do some of my work at coffee shops. And I can't do that anymore. I haven't done that in 6 months. And I don't generally talk to people at the coffee shop, but I just like to be around people and make eye contact and maybe say a word or two once in a while. We really, again, as human beings, we're social animals. We're designed to sort of interact face to face, and we're really missing that. But of course, we're replacing that with, as you say, like more quality time with the people in our households. Although many people, I don't know what the percentages are around the world, but maybe something like 30% or more people live alone. So that's something that they don't have. So we have to take that for granted. And also, and as you say, like, focusing on other activities that give us meaning. I was just thinking about how many people are really into physical exercise these days. Kind of, they have more time. They're not commuting. So that's kind of nice to see everyone's sort of a little bit more buff. Not everyone, but some people. So that's good too, because physical exercise is also something that produces positive emotions and can contribute to more happiness.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been great to see some more sort of outdoor activity. This whole COVID doesn't spread outdoors. People are being outdoors more. But I also think another positive trend, I wonder if you'd agree from your perspective in the States, but I feel as though the conversation on mental well-being and talking about our inner lives as well as our physical health has really been more at the forefront than I've been pleasantly surprised to see how much of the political conversation, the social conversation has really recognized the fact that this crisis is a risk to people's mental well-being. There's high levels of anxiety, there's this problem about social connection and so on. So although the problems are very real, I feel like we're having a more nuanced and sort of emotionally intelligent conversation about what matters. Do you sense that as well?
Absolutely. So both the topic of social interactions and connections is now kind of a hot topic, but also, as you say, there's a much bigger focus on mental health. I feel like there has been a trend, at least in the Western world, that there's more of a focus on understanding that mental health matters. It's not just about physical health. We know that with young people, there's epidemics of anxiety and depression. But now there's even more of a focus on that. So that is a welcome trend that I guess we all hope will continue to be something salient in both, policymakers and sort of, everyone's minds once this whole thing is over.
Yeah, indeed. In a moment, I'd love to come to some of your work on the myths of happiness. But just before we sort of leave these foundational things of kindness and gratitude and connection and so on. When I remember reading your original book and you talked about, as you've already mentioned, this idea of choosing what's right for you. And you mentioned, I think when we spoke the other day, that you have a sort of different, I think you mentioned 3 different categories you think about for personalization when trying to work out what's a good fit for me habit-wise. Could you maybe go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So when you want to choose an approach to happiness, a way to pursue happiness for yourself, that's something that fits your culture, fits your areas of strength and weakness, fits your personality or fits your values. There's really 3 questions that I ask people to ask themselves. And when you think about that, let's say you want to try meditation. You ask yourself, do I think this will be enjoyable? Do I think that it will be meaningful? And do I think that it will feel natural? Now, there's a caveat, which is sometimes things don't at first feel so enjoyable and natural, kind of like when you learn something brand new, it could be uncomfortable at first. So with that caveat, remember that. But I think it's good to sort of start with those activities that are a little bit easier, especially when people are not so happy to begin with. And so, again, something that feels natural, something that feels enjoyable, and sometimes something that feels meaningful.
That's very helpful. Thank you. So your next sort of big popular book on the myths of happiness, I think, for me, brought to light the fact that we're sold a lot of stories about the good life, whether it's about, buying more, earning more, having more, looking perfect. And of course, the social media world we find ourselves in of constant comparison doesn't necessarily help with some of that. But, I think there's quite a lot of misinformation or sort of unhelpful messaging out there about happiness. And I think your research has helped to cut through a lot of that. Would you like to remind us of some of what isn't true about happiness, perhaps?
Sure. I call them the myths of happiness, and they're basically sort of misconceptions about what we think will make us happy, but doesn't necessarily make us happy, although it might differ for different people. And the biggest one is really the pursuit of money, the pursuit of fame, the pursuit of material things, kind of the pursuit of beauty. So these are called sort of extrinsic goals, sort of beauty, fame, material things, money. It's funny. It's like, think about like social media influencers, right? Often are in that category. But what's interesting is having those things actually is associated with happiness, but it's really pursuing them. So let's think about money as an example. So people who have more money, who earn more, are happier. And in part because when you have money, you can choose to spend it on things that make you happy. So for example, you can choose to spend it on helping others, on, giving money away, on philanthropy, on connecting with others. But if you're trying to become happier by becoming richer, sort of the pursuit of wealth or pursuit of material things is associated with unhappiness. So people who kind of have that as a goal are less happy. And same thing with fame and beauty. So so I think that's kind of important. I think a lot of us sort of know that. I mean, that's what's so interesting about these myths, is that they almost seem obvious, right? Like, is anyone listening to this like not know that? And yet we still do. I mean, even I think like, oh, more money would be better, would be nicer, like it's kind of human, I guess, to sort of think that would make us at least a little bit happy.
That quote that I love, which is, money doesn't make you happy, but everybody wants to find out for themselves.
Exactly, right. I'd like to be the person, right? I'd like to be in that study, right? And in part, it's because there's a phenomenon called hedonic adaptation that I talk about in my books. So hedonic adaptation is the idea that human beings are very good at getting used to changes in their lives, to getting accustomed to new things. And so at first we say, so in terms of money or things, we might buy a new pair of shoes or a new car or a new handbag. And at first it makes us happy. I mean, it does make us happy at first. But then we slowly adapt, right? And then it's no longer new and novel and shiny and the car doesn't have that new car smell anymore. And so then that boost goes away. It's a little bit like a drug, the boost kind of goes away and then we want it again, right? So then we buy something else. And so even though we realize that like more handbags or more shoes isn't going to make us happier, we know that each purchase is going to make us happy temporarily. So we keep going for that boost. So that's a very natural human phenomenon, and it's just good to be aware of that.
Yes, indeed. And you're reminding me of one of the central questions that's been on our mind with Action for Happiness from the start, is this question of what really matters. Our course that our volunteers run in communities all around the world now is called Exploring What Matters, and is sort of getting through questions about meaning and relationships and dealing with difficulties and so on. Certainly, what I find in my own life and what I've seen in countless others in our community is a sense of I was leading a certain path. I had some kind of crisis of some kind. In my case, it was like a what am I doing with my life sort of moment, and it enabled me to sort of refocus, and have spent a decade or more really focused on social change and positive ways. And I see that a lot in people who say I was in a dark place, something helped me wake up to what really matters. And obviously your book is a great example of waking up. Like, it's not about the money, folks, it's about the purpose and the relationships and so on. I feel as though in the current COVID situation there's been almost a global opportunity to wake up, and plenty of people seem to be reprioritizing. How can you think we can respond positively to this difficult time and maybe make this a chance to start a new chapter or think of things differently in our lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have more time to reflect, and that is really key, because we often, again, in the Western world, we're just kind of like, we're so busy, we're just kind of running to the next thing, doing one thing, we're traveling, we have work, we have kids. And so we don't have that much time to kind of reflect. And so this situation, the pandemic, is giving us a little bit more time to reflect, as you say, and some of those reflections might lead you to reach some conclusions about what really matters. And maybe you realize that your job isn't really what you want it to be doing, or maybe you don't want to travel as much as you used to, or maybe you want to travel more than you used to. And so I think that reflection is really key. One of my favorite theories in psychology is called self-determination theory. And that theory posits that there are really three kind of basic human needs that are really, really critical for happiness. And I like to they're kind of like three buckets. And those are the, when you reflect and you decide, when you realize what truly matters to you, I think it's likely to fall into one of those three buckets. And we've already kind of been alluding to them. And the first bucket is connecting to others. So anything to do with relationships. And so lots and lots of people, whether it's to end a relationship or to start a new one or to strengthen one or to focus more on certain relationships but not others, a lot of people are reaching that conclusion that it's their relationships, something about their relationships is going to matter most for their happiness. The second bucket is contributing to community, contributing to society, contributing to your neighborhood, at whatever level. So that really has to do with helping and leaving legacy and contribution. And so that's also really critical to happiness, that a lot of us, we might not even be aware of that we're doing that every day. And the third bucket is called personal growth. And that is really anything that we can do to learn, to challenge ourselves. Again, to sort of, whether it's in our jobs or in our hobbies, to be a better parent, to be a better banker, to be a better, to learn how to paint, to learn how to garden, to learn how to cook. So those three buckets, I would guess, when you talk to people about what kind of new meaning they're finding during the sort of time of COVID, I bet it's going to fall into one of those three buckets.
Yeah, well said. And I love that self-determination theory as well. One of the words that sometimes used in connection with that is about sort of sense of autonomy or agency, or sort of feeling that you have some kind of control over what's going on in your world. And of course, this period's been a time when lots of us have felt a real lack of agency or autonomy, because there's so much existential sort of terror and things that are genuinely outside our control, whether it's our work, uncertainty with work or income and so on. And so it sort of reminds me of this, I love that's what's called the serenity prayer, that sort of give me the, I'm probably get this wrong now, but the courage to change the things I can, to accept the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. That sort of sense of like, if you can't change it, change how you think about it. But if you can change it, it probably helps to change it. How do you see that balance in a world where many of us want to change the world? We want to see climate change put right. We want to change our political systems. And yet there's lots we can't change. Where does autonomy fit? And how do we stay engaged without losing hope?
Yeah. Well, I want to start with the caveat that there's some people who really have very little autonomy or control over their lives or over their days. So I want to acknowledge that. For the rest of us, I think autonomy, a lot of it is in our head, right? So it's how we frame how much control we have, because no matter what we do, where we are, for many of us, there are many ways that we can be the change agent, right? There are many ways that through our small acts throughout our days, that we can make a difference both for ourselves and for the world. Again, whether it's, I was just talking to a friend who's writing postcards in different states in the United States to try to change people's minds about who to vote for, right? It doesn't take a lot of time, but that's something that she's doing to try to change the world. There's many different things we can do, and also you can change people's lives one at a time too. You can, that elderly neighbor that you can help by delivering their groceries for them. So again, I think a lot of it is sort of in our head. So when I hear people say like, oh, there's nothing I can do, I feel like I don't have control, or I feel helpless. To me, that's really a sign that the person might be a little depressed, right? Because it's just a kind of a pessimistic view of the world. And we can try to reframe and think about like, what even small actions on a daily basis that we can undertake to create that change.
Yeah, thank you. You're making me sort of reflect on some of this theme of connections being so important, and within that, when we spoke the other day, you reminded me about this idea of the need to belong, this sort of sense that we all have of wanting to be part of something that's so primal and so important and so positive in many ways. And yet, of course, we're also seeing quite a lot of divisive things happening in our society, polarization. Almost we've lost our ability to see different perspectives, to tolerate others. We seem to be becoming less tolerant. And some of that's the desire to belong, and some of that is a misunderstanding or a fear of the other. How can we can't, again, change the cultural situation all around us unless we're in positions of huge influence, but we can sort of be the change in the way we interact with others. How can we be a force for good and try to avoid polarizing and yet still have that sense of belonging?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Yeah, so the need to belong is, some people think is maybe the most critical human need, to feel like we're part of something. And when you look at sort of evolutionary explanations, like it makes sense, right? That as humans, again, we talked about this before, we're social animals. Like the way we survived, the way we found mates, the way we reproduced is by belonging to a group, to a family, to a community. But we also, evolutionary theories talk about how we also are feel threatened by people who are unlike us, right? That also has evolutionary advantages, right? To be kind of threatened or a little bit of afraid of anyone who's sort of unlike us, who's not part of that tribe that we're belonging to. And so we need to kind of overcome that. I mean, some people argue that it's sort of natural for us to fear the other, or to fear or to dislike people who don't share our opinions or who don't look like us. And so we need to kind of overcome that. And so I think those activities we talked about, gratitude, kindness, connection, are really, really great strategies to try to overcome that. When we try to help others, not just people who are like us, but people who are different from us, that naturally makes us feel more connected to them, makes us feel like we're all part of a big whole, like we're all just human, you know. When we're grateful for people on the other side of the world who are somehow play a role, maybe the people who make that iPhone that we're using every day, or, you know, who are somehow playing a role in our lives. Gratitude is very, very powerful when you think about like how many people made it happen that we're sitting here today, you know, on this Zoom call. And then social interacting. So social interaction is actually tricky, because just interacting with someone who's different from us is not going to necessarily make us like them more. Sometimes it makes us dislike them. Talking to people can make us actually feel more hostile. So the connection has to be at a deeper level. And so there's a paradigm in psychology called fast friends, where people ask each other increasingly intimate questions that are really human questions, like, do you want to be famous? And, you know, why and why not? Or do you think some things are too serious to laugh at? Or what is a dream that you've had that you have not been able to accomplish, and why? And so these are all just human questions that all of us can answer. And when researchers bring together people of, say, different groups, different ethnicities, or different groups that don't tend to get along, and they ask each other questions like this, they feel more connected to each other, and they feel less prejudiced about the other groups. So I think psychologists have a lot to sort of offer about what we can do to try to decrease some of that partisanship, the bigotry, sort of the hatred that we have in lots of parts of the world.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think it's probably also true. And another reason why your work is so important is that when we're in a better psychological state, however we've got there, we're also more likely to be open-minded, to be tolerant, to listen to others, to have less of that fight or flight response to others.
Exactly. Actually, that's a great point that you make. So positive emotions, right, make us just feel more open-minded. You know, broaden and build theory, Barbara Fredrickson's broaden and build theory suggests that when we experience joy or curiosity or pride or tranquility, we feel more expansive, right? We sort of include more people in our in-group. We're more open-minded. So yes, absolutely. Just experiencing more positive emotions, I think, is also going to have benefits in terms of these sort of intergroup conflicts, these issues.
Which is so needed right now. So in a moment, I'm going to come to some questions. We've already had some wonderful questions from the audience, but I just wanted to reflect a little bit on the sort of transition in the positive psychology world. I mean, a couple of decades ago, this sort of world of research was only just really getting started. Of course, it's been a massive growth and huge amounts of insight coming out in the last couple of decades. And you know, I think at the beginning, this may be a sort of slightly simplification, but a lot of the work was naturally focused on how do we help the individual to cultivate more positive emotions and to be happier. And I think that's obviously remained a central focus and is vitally important. But I'm sensing that as positive psychology shifts and grows, there's sort of new branches, there's sort of more focus on negative as well as positive emotions, on pro-social behavior more broadly than just the individual. I wanted to ask you really, how have you seen things changing in your experience? What's changed? How has your thinking changed maybe as the world of positive psychology has moved on?
Yeah, I mean, so much change. I mean, I started studying happiness 31 years ago, where, you know, Ed Dieter was the only person in the world who was studying happiness. And now, I mean, what's changed is now people in many fields and many areas are interested in well-being and gratitude and awe and kindness, pro-social behavior. From neuroscientists to organizational psychologists or organizational behavior folks, marketing people, people sort of all across the spectrum, all different sciences and humanities too. And I'm still an expert in the individual. I mean, that's what I was trained to study, you know, how individuals can become happier. But of course, we're also very much aware about how no man is an island, right? No person is an island. Like we're all part of a family, part of a tribe, right? Part of a community, and that our actions affect other people's actions. And then also that there are features of the environment that can affect our happiness. So for just like the colors in our workplaces and how our workplaces are set up or not set up for that matter, since we're not generally there now, or the natural environment, right? How much nature that we see around us really matters for happiness. So there's just so many levels that people in companies, people in education and in healthcare and in government can take steps to affect sort of people that can trickle down, right, to people's happiness. So I guess I would say again, I'm really an expert on the individual, but that I'm just so amazed and inspired that like just people from all over the world, that people from all different areas are interested in these questions, because the more people there are, right, sort of crowd, behavior, the more answers we're going to get. I mean, I get emails every day from just all kinds of people, from like tech entrepreneurs to, prison wardens in prisons, educators, doctors, surgeons, just all kinds of people that are all interested in the same thing. And that is sort of, how do I find meaning? How do we become happier? How do I help my clients, my employees, my students, my patients, have a more meaningful life? So yeah, I'm just very excited that like so many people are interested in this topic.
It's really exciting and such a movement building globally, I think, of scientific experts, practitioners, leaders, and actually, as we see with Active Happiness, just people in their day-to-day lives as parents, as community members, as colleagues, just really wanting to put this into practice. So thanks again for all of your contributions to this. Now I'm going to move on to some brilliant questions we've been having from the audience. An anonymous attendee said, "Hello, Sonja and Mark, I've got a question. What do you do if you've tried everything you can, whether it's therapy, medication, gratitude, meditation, volunteering, exercise, and yet you still feel anxious, depressed, and burned out? I've really tried everything and it doesn't work sustainably." And I think a lot of people sense of like, I want to be happier, and like no one chooses to be unhappy, and I try and do the right things, but I still feel like I struggle. How can we help ourselves in that situation?
Yeah, well, that is one of the hardest questions I think we could ever get, because you can't say, oh, well, you haven't tried X, try something else. Well, there's an article in the New Yorker about sort of an incremental approach to healthcare. And it was about headaches. It was about people who have these terrible headaches, and whatever they try doesn't work. And this one main person that they were talking about that said that they were close to ending their life because they just couldn't live with the headaches. And what they discovered was that it was really like an incremental approach that worked. It was just like they tried this one thing, and it helped their headaches just a tiny bit. And then they added to something else, and it helped them maybe another tiny bit. And they added a third thing and a fifth thing, and like they were doing 20, 30 things in their life that all kind of helped a tiny bit, but it all added up. And so I guess that would be my best answer to that, is that you've tried everything, but maybe try it again and kind of at the same time. I mean, as much as is possible. So you work to make sure you have the right doses of medication, but at the same time you have talk therapy at the same time, you try gratitude at the same time, you exercise. And any one of those things won't seem like it really does much good, but they might sort of add up in this incremental way.
Thank you. As you say, a difficult question. And the next one sort of relates, but brings it a bit more personal. So Judy has asked, could you ask Sonja what she does when she feels down? Do you have a routine to click out of a down mood yourself?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I discover, like many people, that, I'm a fairly happy person, but when I have a rejection or something bad happens, right, I certainly feel that sting of it. I feel down, or sometimes you just wake up and the world just seems like kind of a dark place, right? But I know, I sort of know that it's going to pass. So I just try to kind of remember that it's going to pass. Because some of the strategies like gratitude or sort of distraction, they don't work right away. Like, you just have to know they're not going to work right away. They're going to seem like forced, and they're just not going to work right away. But you know that over time it's going to work. And so I guess that's my approach, is to kind of like try to remember, I know this too shall pass, right? Another quote, I think, from the Bible. But I do think attention is the most critical thing. So William James, who's considered to be sort of the father of psychology and, famous philosopher, he has this quote that I think is incredibly powerful and really kind of mind-boggling. And what he wrote was, experience is what I agree to attend to. Experience is what I agree to attend to. So what that means is that my experience is determined by where my attention lies, right? So it's what I'm thinking about. Am I thinking about the fight I had with my husband yesterday? Or am I thinking about the test that I'm anxious about tomorrow? Or am I thinking about the flowers in front of me? So it doesn't mean that we should always direct our attention to positive things, but it just means that we have so much control of our current experience because we have control over what we pay attention to. So we know at this point, something bad happened, I'm feeling down and low, and my attention's on it. Maybe it should be on it because I need to kind of like think about that problem. But I know with time, my attention will be redirected to something else, which I think is one reason that helping others is so powerful in making people happy. Because when you help others, you're redirecting your attention from yourself onto someone else.
I love that. And in some ways, what he said there is a form of mindfulness in everyday life, really. It's sort of like being able to pay attention, to be conscious of what we're paying attention to rather than living sort of mindlessly on autopilot. That's very wise. I'd like to move on to something that sort of links back to some of your original publications. It's a sort of dual question. First of all, my colleague, who you'll know, I think, Vanessa King, who did the MAP UPenn sort of positive psychology course, and is interested in how the 50-40-10 split of what affects happiness may have changed over time. I think traditionally there was a sort of model that suggested that about half comes from our genes and a relatively small proportion comes from our sort of circumstances, and the rest is down to our intentional choices. But my understanding, at least, is that the thinking on that may have moved on, and in fact it may not be quite that clear cut. I wondered if you might want to comment on that, not least because Juiced has asked a question, which is the 50-10-40 thing, maybe an average, but for me it's more like a third. I mean, of course people are always different, but how would you talk about the latest thinking on that?
Sure. I would love to talk about that because I think there's a lot of misinterpretation of that pie chart, sort of the 50-40-10. And my colleagues and I who developed it for about 18 years ago, so it's a long time ago, have rethought it. And we actually have a paper, and actually I have a website, sonjalyubomirsky.com. All my papers are on there. You can find it there from 2019 that kind of is about revisiting the pie chart. So basically what we say is that yes, when you think about what are the key determinants of happiness, what are the key contributors to happiness, genetics genetic influences is certainly a key contributor to our happiness. Our life circumstances, where we live and how healthy we are, whether we're married, how old we are, how much money we make, whether those are going to also contribute to our happiness. And then a third bucket is what we do in our daily life, sort of our actions, our behaviors, our ways of thinking. Those also contribute to happiness. The mistake that I think that I made is giving those buckets a number, that 50-40-10 number, because those numbers I think people took way too seriously. We meant them as really, really, really rough estimates that came from a bunch of studies. But the numbers really, so I guess I would say to viewers today, to sort of listeners right now, don't worry about those numbers. Just think about that there are these sort of three influences, our life circumstances, our genetics, sort of our kind of like, the personality that we're born with, and what we do. And those all matter, and they all matter to a great extent. And I just can't really tell you, like, as you say, one person says it's 30-30-30. For someone else, it might be something else. And for example, what your circumstances are going to matter a huge amount. So if your life is pretty comfortable and everything's pretty good, then it might be 10%. But if you live in poverty, or if you're in an abusive relationship, or if you're, you live in a war zone in a country at war, I mean, it's going to be 90%. And so it's going to depend. And also those three factors interact they influence each other. So they're not independent. Because happier people are more likely to kind of have better circumstances. Anyway, so just to say that, don't worry about those numbers, the 50-40-10. Just think about those three factors, that they all matter to some extent, and that a lot of happiness, we started with this point, a lot of happiness is under our control. And I can't tell you sort of what percent, but some big portion is, and which should make us all kind of somewhat hopeful and optimistic.
Absolutely. And on that note, a question from Ivan brings us back to children. Because if what you've just said is true, that at least a chunk of our happiness is within our control, shouldn't this be something that we teach everyone at an early point in their life? So Ivan said, how can we teach these concepts early in life, for example, in primary schools? It seems super relevant this week as we're going back to school. In the UK, a report came out looking at how bad children's well-being is generally in this country. I think around the world, kids are under massive pressure, perhaps more so than ever before, with rising mental health issues, social media pressure, and so on. How can we embed this?
Great question. And I just want to start by saying you should be grateful your kids are actually back in school, because my kids are in Zoom school, which is not ideal. Yes, there's an epidemic of anxiety and depression in kids, especially adolescents, starting with tweens and teenagers. Incredible rates. And you're right, but it starts early. And so how do we teach our kids? I mean, I think, we just tell them that I remember being a kid, especially being a teenager, and having problems and thinking, there's nothing I can do. And so there may be something about just sort of not being developmentally kind of ready to truly understand that. So I'm not a developmental psychologist, so I can't really speak confidently about that, but there may be something about being a kid, or especially a teenager, where you just no matter how much you tell them, no, there is something you can do. Look at this research, that you still can't quite believe that until you have a little bit more, again, developmental readiness or more maturity and experience. But we can certainly tell them, and we can model it for them, right? So if mom is, unhappy for a while, she can sort of show her kids, I was kind of unhappy, but now I'm trying to do this. Now I've taken up yoga, and I'm trying to meet up with my friends for lunch on a regular basis, and I'm doing this and this, and see, mom is now happier. So maybe by modeling that might be more effective than just telling.
Yeah, thank you. Really good. So a few people have raised or followed on from something you said earlier about the deep questions or intimate questions and conversations with people, back to this idea of connection. So Karen said, I'm really curious about the deep questions to ask new people. Wonder if you could refer us to a place to find these kind of questions or give us some examples. Teresa said, I really love this idea of intimate questions with people who are unlike you. What kind of questions can we use to get started? Any further resources we can direct people to?
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, by the way, I don't know if you are able to sort of email or somehow.
We'll be getting back to everyone tomorrow who's been part of this, so we can send any link.
I can certainly send resources to you. But that task, which is called Fast Friends, is also called the 36 Questions task, and it became famous because there was a New York Times article about it. Because some people who engage in this task fall in love. We have two people kind of asking each other increasingly intimate questions. And so if they just Google 36 questions, New York Times, they will find it. But I can also actually send you all the questions in case people want, if you want those questions. But I find that approach really intriguing, because again, these are just kind of deep human questions. And whether you want to improve your relationship with your spouse or with a friend, one at a conference. The last conference I was at was in February, before all conferences were canceled. And I had dinner with a friend, and we decided to try it at dinner. And so we started sort of asking each other and answering these questions. And it was great. I mean, it was a close friend, but we got even closer. So you could try it with your romantic partner. You can try it with your kids. You can try it with your neighbors. And again, try it with people who you don't know, maybe people you don't like, maybe there's a colleague who you never really like so much. Try that task with them. So I think it's really powerful, and we're actually set to use them in some studies where we try to get people to connect better.
Great, thank you. And we'll certainly try and share links and things in the follow-up email. Bringing us on to a topic, a difficult one, trauma. Is being brought up here in a question by Jessica, and I guess there's a lot of trauma people are experiencing right now, whether it's around the current pandemic or indeed just many of life's ups and downs. She's asked, I'm very interested in the application of positive psychology in the aftermath of trauma, particularly addictions and also cancer. Can you talk a little bit about how positive psychology is relevant in those kind of quite extreme situations?
Yeah. Yeah, I think positive psychology is absolutely relevant. So in the aftermath of trauma, wow. I mean, well, there's work on post-traumatic growth where some people are kind of lucky where they're able to look at their trauma in a way where they are able to kind of grow from it. But that's really, really difficult. As I said, that could take years, and some people never are able to do that. Well, I will say something that I've been thinking about a lot, which is that there's some new, it's actually not so new, but some research showing that certain kinds of psychoactive drugs like MDMA, which is the key ingredient in ecstasy, and psilocybin, some psychedelic drugs, have been incredibly powerful tools to use in helping people process trauma. Because trauma, people basically you're not able to process it if it's so scary that you can't face it, you can't face those memories. And so there's certain kinds of drugs that help you. Just trying it once or two or three times, it's not like something you take every week, every day. People are able to sort of process those traumas. So I actually am interested in starting a new field called sort of psychedelic social psychology or psychedelic positive psychology, where we can use these psychoactive substances to try to help us heal. So I think there's great potential for that. So I don't think you thought I was going to go there, but I think there's it's just an intractable problem. It's a really, really difficult problem. And, the clinical trials with MDMA are showing that I believe it was a year after MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. These are with PTSD patients. These are people who have had PTSD for an average of 18 years and nothing basically worked. And I believe something like 67% of them a year later were no longer diagnosed with having PTSD. So I think there's lots of sort of potential treatments out there, and positive psychology can play a role, because that connecting with your therapist is really critical. I keep talking about connection, but it's not just about connection with other people in your life. For something to really be effective, you need to connect with the person who's helping you, right? So it could be a coach or a therapist. So anyway, big question.
Amazing, thank you. Another big question that a couple of people have raised is about religion and spirituality and happiness. So Ivan's asked, do religion or spirituality increase happiness? And I'm not sure if I pronounced this right, but Nawera has asked, do religion or religious practices help improve levels of positive emotions? I think my sense is that this sort of slightly differs depending on which culture you're in and the sort of context as well. But what does the research say?
Sure. So, the research says that there's a really strong correlation between religious beliefs, religious behavior, and also spirituality and happiness. So religious people are happier than people who are not religious. Now, that's a correlation. So the question is why, right? Because there's no experiments. You can't do an experiment where you ask some people, you randomly assign some people to be more religious and other people not to be religious, right? So you can really only do sort of correlational studies. So what researchers have shown is that there are really three main reasons why, is that religion often gives people a great deal of social support and community, and religious people who are very strongly sort of involved in their temple, church, mosque, have stronger sort of sense of community and support. And so that might be one reason that religious people are happier. So you could have that support without religion. And the other reason is a sense of sort of meaning in life and sort of meaning in terms of coping with adversity. So people who are religious or spiritual report having more a sort of certain kind of meaning than people who are less religious. So again, these are correlations, and so you can sort of interpret them in different ways. But the way I interpret it is that you could have sort of what religion gives you without actually having that religion. And it does matter on the religion. And some really intriguing studies more recently show that fit matters. So if you're a religious person in a country that's not very religious, or if you're an atheist in a country that's very religious, then you're not going to be as happy. So it's sort of better to be kind of in a country where you're surrounded by people who are more like you.